Hello. I see we have one person here already, Cheryl. If you're here and you're able to find it, can you say hello to me in the chat window so that I know that you were able to find it? You should be able to find it in your toolbar. Wonderful, thank you. So chat will be the main way that you'll be communicating with me during this class. So I would love to hear a little bit about you before we get started, and while we're waiting for maybe other folks to join us. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What's your LSAT story? Are you taking the test soon? Have you been studying for a long time? For those of you just joining us, we're just taking a minute to introduce ourselves in the chat window. So find the chat tool and tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you located? Where are you at in your LSAT prep? So for example, are you just starting out? Or are you getting ready to take a test soon? Find the chat button and introduce yourself. Cool, that's great. Cheryl, I'm glad you're starting with us. This will be a nice intro to some of the important stuff that you'll see on the LSAT. I see we've got a couple other folks here. See if you can find the chat window, click around on your tools. I will say something so that your chat window will glow at you to help you find it. And once you've found it, just say hello so that I know you've got it. That'll be your main tool for talking to me during this free prep hour. If you don't see it, try clicking the ... more button and look for chat. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Keep looking for that chat window if you haven't been able to find it yet. It's a great way to be more actively involved in our free LSAT prep hour today. My name is Allison Bell, and I'm going to be your instructor today. I am located in San Francisco, in Berkeley specifically. I have been teaching with Manhattan Prep for about 8 years now. So I took the LSAT when I was in college at Duke University, and I got a 178. I decided actually not to apply to law school because I wanted to be a teacher. And so I became a public school teacher. I taught middle school history and English for 8 years or 9 years or something like that. And I've also been teaching LSAT along the way, which has been a lot of fun. It's really nice after a day full of middle school children to hang out with some really interesting and talented adults in the evening and help them with their law school ambitions. So I really enjoy teaching, and I'm glad that all of you are here with us tonight. And if you do get a chance and you find the chat button, send me a hello and tell me where you're located and where you're at with your LSAT studying, if you're just starting out, or if you're getting more in the review stages of your LSAT. We're going to go ahead and get rolling with our agenda for this evening. First, wanted to share a couple of other ways that you can explore some free LSAT prep options if you're interested. It is actually possible to try one of our real in-person or online courses for free. We offer 10-session LSAT classes, and anyone can sit in on session 1 of any class, which is 3 hours of LSAT prep for free in any one of our major locations or online. So if you're interested, you can sign up as a trial student for session 1 on our website. We also have a really cool LSAT Interact online course, and that is something that you can do kind of at your own pace, and it's really fantastic. And that is something that you can try on our website as well. So I encourage you to check those out if you're looking for some great ways to get a little bit deeper into your LSAT prep and see what's available for you. So tonight's lesson is going to be focused on logic games. In particular, we're going to dive deep into one type of logic game and take a look at an example of something called a hybrid game. And we'll be doing a full set of questions with that logic game. We're going to review the major question types that come up frequently in logic games. Those are orientation, conditional, and unconditional. If any of this sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo to you right now, if you're perhaps in the early stages of your LSAT prep, that's totally okay. I will definitely make sure to explain all the lingo that we're using here as we go throughout the lesson, and why it's important, why you need to be familiar with these terms, or at least with these concepts, in order to help you do well on the LSAT. Before I do that, though, I often find that the best way for folks to learn about logic games is by doing logic games. And so rather than tell you how to do a logic game, I'm going to first give you an opportunity to experiment a little bit on your own. So I am going to show you a logic game that is a real one from the June 2007 LSAT. And all I'm going to show you right now is the initial setup portion, so there won't be any questions to go along with it just yet. I will give you a couple of questions after we have discussed how to diagram this game. Since I'm just giving you the setup portion, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to work on creating a diagram that makes sense to you, and then we will talk about it. So here comes your game. And I'm going to start a timer and grab some scratch paper, and your time is starting now. All right, that is your 3 minutes. And I apologize if it seems a little rude to cut you off. One of the things that you'll find if you're new to the LSAT is that timing pressure is a big component of being successful with the LSAT. On the actual LSAT, you have to do 4 logic games like these, plus a set of maybe 5 to 8 questions for each one, all in less than 35 minutes. And so it's very, very rare that my students do not report to me that it's very difficult to manage the time on the LSAT. And so we can talk tonight about some of the ways that you can work on your timing for a logic game like this. First, I want to just get an idea of how this went for everybody. So I'm going to send out a poll, and the poll is going to have answers A through E. And I'm asking you to just give me a rating of how this went for you so far. So an A would be, I finished a diagram and I feel really confident and the timing went well. An E would be, I feel pretty lost on this game. Like I really just didn't have any approach. And then you could also pick a letter in between to show me that you're kind of somewhere along the way. Are you closer to A or are you closer to E? So you're going to see a poll pop up. Please tell me how you're feeling about this logic game. Awesome, thank you. So it looks like everybody was feeling mostly pretty confident about this logic game, somewhere in the upper half of A through C, which is awesome. So I'm gonna make some space here to create a diagram and talk through with you some of the big things that I would notice as I'm going through a logic game like this one. So first I'm given some elements, greed, harvest, and limelight. So I always like to create some sort of elements bank for myself to keep track of those. And then I'm told that they're going to be shown on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. A lot of times when I see days of the week, I start to envision, okay, maybe this is going to work out to be something where I need a number line. It could also be a grouping game, but I'm going to think about a lot of times days of the week are my base element. They're going to go at the bottom of the diagram. So I'm starting to think maybe that's how I'm going to want to set up my board. Then they tell me each film is shown at least once during the festival. That's always important information to keep track of, especially the language of at least once. That means it could possibly be shown more than once. And you definitely need to keep track on these logic games of, am I using each element one time? Am I repeating it more than one time? Is it possible that I won't use all of the elements, and jot that down? But never more than once on a given day. That's pretty important too. So that means that if I'm thinking about my game in terms of Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, there's a maximum number of films that I'm going to see during the festival on each of those days, and it's going to max out at 3. So now I start to be able to envision this using kind of a grouping board. So I'm going to say, okay, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the highest number of films I'm going to be able to see is 3, since there's only 3 films and they can't repeat. They tell me on each day at least 1 film is shown. This language of at least 1 film is important. This is language that's often used in a type of game called open grouping. And open grouping is when we're not sure how many elements are in each group. So we need to keep track of that in some way. And this definitely fits that mold. Maybe we're going to have 3 films in Thursday, maybe we're going to have 2, but they tell us we definitely need to have at least 1. So with open grouping, if I want to have a space where I know I'm definitely going to need some letter there, but I'm not sure which one, then I use a box. And that box for me designates I need to fill this spot with something. So I'm going to go ahead and put a box on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday to indicate that I'm going to need to fill it with something. Films are shown one at a time, okay? And then I get some rules. My rules are where things start to get interesting with this game because they start to bring in this element of order. When I look at my rules, it's not just, oh, this film can only go with this film or this film can't go with this film. It's bringing in this element of time. Films are being shown after or not being shown after each other. And that's where I start to think about this being what we call a hybrid game. A hybrid game is a mixed game of our two major logic games categories, which are grouping games and ordering games. A lot of games on the LSAT will just ask you to either put things into groups or to put things in order in some sort of number line. But occasionally you'll get a more challenging game that asks you to do a little bit of both. And so we call that a hybrid game. Oftentimes your board is still going to be pretty similar to what you might use for a more traditional grouping game or perhaps even for a traditional ordering game, but you'll need to make some adjustments based on the way that the rules are set up. So in this case, they tell me Harvest is going to be shown on Thursday, and there will be no film shown after it that day. So I definitely want to keep track of that information, but I don't know if Harvest is going to be the first film shown and then there will be nothing after it, or maybe everything's going to be shown on Thursday and Harvest will be the third film shown. So I'm going to go ahead, and now that I know that ordering is kind of an issue here, I'm going to find a way to keep track of that. So for this particular game, I'm just going to imagine that the bottom film is the first one that gets shown on the day, and the top row represents the last film to get shown on that day. Since I don't know which one H is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and put just like a little floating H in a cloud up above Thursday. And down below, I'm going to notate what they tell me, that there's nothing going above H. So I am going to put an H with a line and a slash. That's another one of my open grouping notations. A line with a slash in it means that a spot cannot be filled. So wherever I put my H in, I need to remember to cross off any boxes that are above it. I can't put anything there. Then I go to my second rule. On Friday, either Greed or Limelight, but not both, is shown. Okay, so I'm going to put a G/L up above Friday, and the slash helps me know that they can't both be shown. And then no film is shown after it on that day. So I'm going to use a similar notation to what I used with H. It's great to be consistent with your notation as much as possible. So I'm going to put G/L with a line through it. And then on Saturday, they tell me it's going to be either G or H. So I'm going to make a little room to write that and put G/H right up here. And then again, no film is shown after it on that day. So I'm going to put G/H. Same deal with the line over it like that. Okay, I'll put my G/H in a circle. So I've got all my rules notated. I've got a board. I also want to make sure that I go through a really important step that's easy to leave out before I move into the questions, and that is making inferences. I want to think through the information that I've been given and see if I can figure anything out. One of the big types of inferences that you can make with this particular type of game, open grouping, where you need to think about how many elements will go in each group, is do any of the rules put a limit on the number of elements that could go, for example, on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday? So I'm going to open that up to the chat. I would love to see, what do you all think? Are there any inferences we can make about the number of films that could be seen on any of these days? If you have an idea, tell me in the chat. If you're not sure, you can just give me a question mark so I know you're there. Okay, looks like we're not sure. That's okay. So I'm going to think about especially Friday and Saturday. They tell me that I can only have G or L, but not both. So is it going to be possible to have all 3 films and fill up all 3 spaces? No. One of them is going to have to be left out. I just don't know which one yet. So I'm going to cross off a space, and I'm going to do the same thing for Saturday. All right. Now I will say that this diagram is sort of the alleyway of solving this game, but like many hybrid games, there's a variety of ways that you could set up a diagram that would still be effective. One thing that many folks might have done on this particular game is to set it up in a more number line type of style. So they might have Thursday, and then maybe the 3 lines for the movies, Friday, and then the 3 lines, and then Saturday with the 3 lines next to it. And that type of notation could absolutely work for this game. You would still be able to make the same types of inferences. It's pretty much the same diagram that I have, just turned on its side. You might still find it beneficial to put a box around one of the lines so that you know that you have to have at least 1 film on each day. And you would still be able to make the same types of inferences, that you could only have 2 on Friday and only 2 on Saturday. And you could perhaps make a cloud above the remaining 2 spaces with your elements that are going to go in those spaces. And everything else could be notated in a pretty similar way to the diagram above. So oftentimes there is more than one. Some of you may even have done it a different way that is still effective and just something that's unique to you. What you want to think about with your logic games diagrams is if they're ever different from what you see in the book or in a course, you want to think about, are you still getting the questions right? And are you still getting them right in a timely manner? And is there anything that's lucky about that? Is there anything about your diagram that might be confusing if you were to use it the same way in the future? When you do have multiple options for diagrams, you just want to think about which one makes the most sense to you in terms of this particular game, and go with one that makes the most sense to you. All right, I'm going to pause for a second and just give you an opportunity, if you have any questions, to type them in the chat window. And if you're comfortable with this and you're ready to move on, can you put a smiley face in the chat window? And a question could be anything like, could you re-explain something to some specific question that this is bringing up for you? But if you're good, give me a smiley. I like that. No, I don't have any more inferences to draw, although if anyone has any that they came up with, I'd love to hear it. Yeah. Okay. I'll keep my eyes on the chat. If anything else comes up, let me know. I do want to say that we're going to move on to the questions in a minute, and the diagram that I have here will go away. So if you still need to copy down the diagram, please type "wait" in the chat right now so that I don't wipe it off while you still need it. Okay, I'm not seeing any dramatic requests for me to stop. So we're going to take this diagram and move it into the questions, and I'm going to clear this off a bit. All right. So as I mentioned, this particular type of game falls within a special category of LSAT games called a hybrid. The majority of games on the LSAT are going to ask you to do one of two things, either put elements into groups or put them into order. And this particular game asks you to do a little bit of both, so we just want to be able to adapt to that. All right, let's give a question a try. I will give you about a minute, which is the average amount of time you want to spend on an LSAT question, and let's see how it goes. All right, that's a minute. I am going to send you a new poll and ask you to pull in the answer that you came up with. If you don't have an answer yet, then you can just put your best guess. Ask everybody to pull in. Just a guess is fine if you're still working on it, so I know where you're at. Awesome, thank you. I see somebody throwing in their answer. Thank you. Okay, excellent. So, tough question, and especially tough to get this done under time pressure. This is one of the three major types of LSAT questions that we're going to be learning about tonight. The three types are orientation, conditional, and unconditional. And this particular question is called an orientation question. We call it that because it kind of orients you to the game after you've set up your diagram. So an orientation is typically the first question after you set up a game. So here, this is the second game. That's why it's numbered 6, but it would be the first question you were asked after you wrote your diagram. It typically asks for a complete possible setup of the game. And there's a particular approach that is super useful for this that I'm going to share with you tonight. One approach that a lot of people take, and that some of you may have taken, is that they go through the answer choices one at a time, and they kind of evaluate whether that answer breaks the rule. So for example, they look at A and they go, okay, so Thursday, limelight, then harvest. Is that okay? Yeah, Thursday harvest is shown. I don't see anything about limelight on Thursday. Seems okay. Then they look at Friday. Okay, limelight on Friday does have it. Yeah, that's good. That method is kind of a natural one to go to, but there's a much faster method that a lot of students really like once they learn about it. And the method I was just demonstrating, I would call it the answer by answer method, where you're going one answer at a time and evaluating it. And surprisingly, it's actually much more efficient to go rule by rule. And rather than look at the answers, to look at the rules and apply them to each answer. So for example, I'd start with, on Thursday, harvest is shown, and no film is shown after it on that day. So I keep that in mind. I might even just pick the first part of that rule to focus on. Harvest needs to be shown on Thursday. And I'm going to scan through the answer choices, looking for anything where harvest is not shown on Thursday. So Thursday, harvest. Great. I don't even look at anything else about that answer choice right now. Thursday, harvest, Thursday, harvest, Thursday, harvest, and then Thursday, harvest. Cool. Seems okay. So I'll check out the second part of that rule. No film is shown after it on that day. Okay, limelight before harvest, 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 greed, then harvest, greed, then harvest. Oh, okay. Thursday for answer choice D has greed, then harvest, then limelight. So I have a film being shown after harvest, so I know that that answer is not going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and cross that off, and then I'm going to move to the second rule. On Friday, either green or limelight, but not both is shown. Okay, let me start by checking that. Friday, limelight. Friday, greed, then limelight. Ooh, okay, they said not both, so I'm going to go ahead and cross off B. I'll keep working through the answers. Friday, limelight. Friday, limelight, then harvest. Okay, that seems good. And no film is shown after it on that day. I'll go back through to see. Okay, so Friday's just limelight for A. Friday, just limelight. Friday, limelight, then harvest. Ooh, they have a film shown after it, so I'm going to cross that one off. And then on Saturday, greed or harvest, but not both, is shown, and no film is shown after it on that day. So I see Saturday, harvest, see Saturday, greed, I see Saturday, harvest, no film shown after it. Okay, so harvest is last, greed is last. Okay, so between these two answer choices, it doesn't seem like any of those three rules is going to get me all the way to the correct answer. I'm pretty close, but when that happens, when the rules don't get me all the way to the correct answer, typically the issue is going to be something in my initial setup. And often it will have to do with the constraints about using all the films or not using all the films. So I go back to check that out, and it tells me each film is shown at least once during the festival. So that would be the first thing that I would check. And then if that doesn't pan out, never more than once on a given day. Okay. So I go back and I'm looking at A, limelight, harvest. Oh, there's no greed. So A schedule doesn't show all of the films at least once, so I would cross it off. The cool thing about this strategy is if you're using it effectively, you don't even need to check the remaining answer because it's going to be the correct answer. So you can just circle it and move on. This process of the rule-by-rule approach for orientation questions works for all types of logic games, but only for this particular question type or questions that happen to look very much like an orientation question. Generally, if you get strong at this process, this rule-by-rule process, you should be shooting for 100% accuracy on these types of questions. And you should be able to achieve that in less than, I'd say, 45 seconds. Ambitiously, you might try to pare it down to 30 seconds or less once you get really comfortable with this approach. It's super reliable, and there typically are 4 orientation questions, 1 for each logic game, which means this is a great way to get 4 easy, safe points, no matter how well you understand the diagram or don't understand the diagram, and to get those points very quickly. All right, so that's an orientation question. I'll pause for a second. If you have any questions, now would be a great time to tell me in the chat window. If you're good with this, give me a smiley face. Yeah, so someone asked, why is it C and not A again, and what was it in the initial setup? So I'll show you on the this part right here. So it's where it says each film is shown at least once during the festival. And on our initial diagram, we had written that out as GHL equals 1 plus, meaning they each have to be used at least one time. When I look at answer choice A, I see L is used and H is used, then L is used again and H is used again, but G is never used, so that's why it's incorrect. Yeah, these double part rules are certainly very tricky, and that's why sometimes I just do one part of the rule at a time so that I can kind of stay focused. All right, I hope that answered your questions, but I'll pause for a second again and let me know if there's any more that you want to talk about. Okay, I'm going to clear this off then. And here's a quick recap if you'd like to see it written out of orientation questions. So they're the first question after a game. They ask for complete possible setup, and you should use the rule by rule approach. All right, I've got a new question for you. Another minute. Here you go. All right, that's a minute already. I'm going to send you a poll. And go ahead and give me your answer or your best guess. Cool, I'm waiting on one more. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so this is our second question type out of the three that I mentioned. This is what we call an unconditional question. These are a pretty challenging question category for many folks, myself included. Unconditional questions give you no new information beyond just the diagram and the rules that you've already made. So it doesn't tell you, for example, oh, grade's going to go on Friday. What can you figure out? It just says what cannot be true. So it has to be based on what you already know. That means that for unconditional questions, you're going to rely a lot on your rules, diagrams, and inferences that you've already made. And a lot of times you're going to want to be strategic about how you approach the answer choices. The kind of main way through an unconditional question is to just buckle down and test each answer choice and see if you can, in this case, disprove it. And that can be very time consuming. So I want to think about which answer choices seem promising to me and which ones seem like they're not likely to be the case. In this case, there's a couple of answer choices that I would think about from the get-go. I know we can't see it now, but if we look back at our orientation question, we would see that it has a different film shown last on each day of the festival. So we could actually say answer choice E here it could work, it could happen, so I'm going to cross it off. Another answer choice that I would just kind of quickly think through and say, I don't think so, would be answer choice D. A different film is shown first on each day of the festival. We know that Thursday is going to have Harvest, Friday is going to have Greed or Limelight, Saturday is going to have Greed or Harvest. Based on that info, it seems like pretty reasonable to imagine that I could just have a lineup like HLG. So I don't really want to spend a lot of time on D. So that narrows it down for me a little bit without a bunch of work to A, B, and C. Anytime I have a question that asks me for something that cannot be true, the first thing I want to do is just kind of interpret what does that mean. And that's the case for any unconditional question. So if something cannot be true, it must be false. For any LSAT question that asks you for something that must be false or that must be true, your general approach is to try to prove it wrong. So you want to try to disprove each answer choice. So for example, they say, okay, it cannot be true that Harvest is the last film shown on each day. I say, yeah, it can. Let me show you. And what's going to happen is for 4 of the answer choices, I'll be able to show you. I'll be able to find a way where it can work, and I'll cross those answer choices off. But for 1 of the answer choices, I won't be able to find a way to make it work, and then I'm going to choose that answer choice. So since I'm down to 3, I'm just going to go ahead and start testing the answer choices. So A says Harvest is the last film on each day of the festival. So I'm going to make a quick sketch diagram. I know that I could have 3 films here, 2 and 2 for my Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And so I'm going to try to make this work. Harvest is the last film on Thursday, so I could just put Harvest here on Thursday. There's nothing to say that anything has to come after it. It says no film is shown after it. Nothing has to come before it. So I'll just make that work. Okay, I'm going to try to make Harvest the last film on Friday, so I'll put Harvest here. And then it says I need Green or Limelight, but not both, so let's just say Greed. And no film is shown after on that day. Well, shoot, there's the problem. If I put Greed in, which I have to, or Limelight, it has to be the last one shown on Friday, which means that H could go on Friday, but it can't go last. It's going to have to go earlier. So there it is. That's what it looks like to prove one of these answer choices correct. There's no way for me to make Harvest the last film shown on Friday. I don't need to go any further. It can't be the last film shown on each day of the festival, and I'm going to choose answer A. Now, I had to work through a diagram in order to solve that, but really I was just solving it based off of this second rule here. So I may have been able to possibly reason my way to that a little bit sooner by thinking about my rules and applying them to my answer choices. Typically for these types of questions, the answer is going to lie either in some subtlety of a rule or in some inference that you may have made in your initial setup. All right, let me pause there and give me either a smiley face or put your questions in. Okay, thank you. All right, let me clear this off and we'll move on. So that was an unconditional question. Again, no new information. You want to be thoughtful and strategic about which answers to test first. So you don't always necessarily just want to go A through E, trying every answer out. If it's a must be true or false question, you want to attempt to disprove each answer. And if it's a could be true or false question, then you want to try to prove it by making a diagram that shows that it can be true or it can be false. All right, here's your next question. Okay, I'm going to send you a poll. Tell me what you think. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so it looks like we're down to either D or E, and that makes a lot of sense. Anytime that I have a question that's asking me about the maximum number or the minimum number, I want to start by thinking big picture. So I remember in my initial diagram that I made some inferences that led me to the fact that on Friday and Saturday, I could only possibly have 2 films showing. And this is where those inferences come in handy and make it a little easier for me to think this through. So looking at my diagram, I have 7 total slots. When I have a max-min question, if it's a max question, I want to try by starting with the highest possible number and seeing, can I make that happen? So could I possibly make 7 happen and still have limelight never shown again once greed is shown? Well, if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to need to have all 3 films on the first day. So I'm going to have harvest. It's going to have to be last on the first day. I'm going to have greed and limelight. So if I put greed first, then I can't even have limelight. Limelight can never be shown again. So I'll put limelight first and then greed. And then now I can't show limelight ever again. So that's going to restrict my options for everything else. So I go to Friday, trying to maximize the number of spots. I can't have limelight ever again. So I'm going to put greed, and then I'll use harvest. Saturday, I can't have limelight ever again. I can have only greed or harvest. So I pick one, let's say harvest, but I'm not allowed to use the other, and I can't use limelight. So I'm stuck with one. So that shows me 2 things at the same time. One is I can't create a board with 7. I tried and it's not possible. And 2 is I just created a board with 6. So that strategy of starting with the highest number when you're asked for the maximum can be super useful, and that you can both disprove and prove something at the same time. So our correct answer here is D. This type of question is called an unconditional question. This particular one was a little unique, but let's talk about big picture strategy for unconditional questions. Ooh, we got a typo there, so I'm going to fix it. Unconditional. So an unconditional question is a question that gives you new information. So it'll say, if blah, blah, blah is the case, then which of the following could be true or must be true, or what have you. For these types of questions, you generally want to create some sort of new diagram and make inferences using the new information. So on the last question, we created a new diagram following that rule and attempting to maximize the highest possible number of options. We're going to try another question, and it's a bit more of a traditional unconditional question. So what I encourage you to do for this one is when you're given the new information, go ahead and just try to play out a diagram with that information and see where it leads you in terms of your answers. All right, here is your next question. All right, go ahead and pull in your answers. Again, you can give me your best guess if you're not sure. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is more of a traditional conditional question. Oh, you know what? That is making me realize that I should clarify something. My brain wasn't working, and I said there was a typo on the last slide, and there wasn't. And I want to make sure I give you the right information. So I don't know why I said these need to be called unconditional questions. The questions I was describing and the final type of questions we're doing tonight are actually called conditional questions. I apologize for that slip. And a conditional question is the type of question that starts with if, unlike the unconditional questions that we did earlier that just had no new information and you had to work only from the rules. So the previous question that we did, just as a quick refresher so that I don't confuse you, was this one. And this one we would call a conditional question because it has an if and new information, and we created a new diagram for it. And I really don't know why I mixed those up, but this is also called a conditional question. And so we're going to make a more traditional conditional approach for this one. So when I have a conditional question, I'm typically going to just quickly sketch a new diagram to help me deal with this new information that I've been given. In this case, I get a lot of new information, which is exciting because it means I can make a lot of inferences. So they tell me that they're going to show greed exactly 3 times. So I'm going to put that on my diagram. It means greed needs to be on all 3 days. So I'm going to put greed on Thursday. I know that greed will be last on Friday, and greed will be last on Saturday. So I filled that in right away. And then they tell me harvest is going to be shown twice. So I think about where harvest could go. One of the things that I know is that Saturday can't have both greed and harvest, and it already has greed. So the only 2 places that it can go are now Friday and Thursday. And then they tell me that limelight is going to be shown exactly once. And so I start to think about where it could go. And it looks like there's 2 options for me. One is on Thursday and one is on Saturday. And so I'm not sure where it'll go. So I could mark that in a couple ways. One would just be to put an L with a slash on both of those days. And that would tell me it could go in either or. And then I run through my answer choices. All 3 films are shown on Thursday. Maybe, but it doesn't have to be true, and I'm looking for something that must be true. Exactly 2 films are shown on Saturday. Maybe, but it doesn't have to be true. Limelight and Harvest are both shown on Thursday. Maybe, doesn't have to be true. Greed is the only film shown on Saturday. Maybe, doesn't have to be true. Harvest and Greed are both shown on Friday. That is written into stone. There's no way out of that one. And so that is my correct answer, E. Notice that all of the incorrect answers were things that could be true based on my diagram. They just don't have to be. That's the LSAT's way of making this question a little bit more challenging. They don't just give you answers that are obviously false based on the diagram. They give you answers that could be true to really probe the subtleties of your understanding of this. All right. That is where we're going to start wrapping up. So to recap, tonight we talked a little bit about the 3 major types of logic games: ordering, grouping, and hybrid games. You're quite welcome. And we also have seen the 3 question types: orientation, unconditional, and conditional. Remember, orientation questions are those first questions after the game setup, and they're the ones where you want to do the rule-by-rule approach. Unconditional questions are ones with no new information, and for those questions, you are going to rely on your diagram and your rules. And conditional questions are the last two that we did. They start with if, and they give you new info, and you want to quickly sketch a new diagram and add your inferences, and then use those to eliminate answer choices. When you're studying for logic games, oftentimes at first these things are going to feel a little slow as you're moving through the processes. And I encourage you to really just focus on making sure you're doing the process right at first. The way that we get faster at these things is through repetition. So for example, once you've tried the game that we did tonight a couple of times, you could then start doing it timed and working on getting through those same moves faster. The game we did tonight, by the way, was the second game in the June 2007 practice test, which is free and available for you to download off of our website. So if you'd like to play it again, that's where you can find it. And if you're interested in trying one of our classes, there's a lot more like this in them. You can see our upcoming schedule of courses on our website, and you can try the first session for free. Thank you so much for coming. If you have questions, please send me a chat. If not, enjoy the rest of your Sunday.